Edison Open Forum Cannabinoids 2021. My name's Vivienne Parry. Now, legalization, increasing acceptance and demand for both pharmaceutical and consumer products mean the cannabinoid industry is booming. By 2026, the global market is estimated to be worth $60 billion, but biosynthesis could take it to new heights. Edison Open Forum asked the brightest minds in CBD what they think the impact of biosynthesis will be and what's next for their sector. With me is Roy Lipski, CEO of Creo Ingredients. Roy, hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So Creo Ingredients, just tell me a bit more about what it does.
Well, Creo is a biosynthesis, cannabinoid biosynthesis firm. We have a particular vision. Our vision is that cannabinoids belong in every household. These are an amazing class of ingredients, combining three properties that each one in their own right would make them an interesting class of ingredients. Bioactivity, true bioactivity, interacting with the body's endocannabinoid system that's represented throughout the body, goes all the way back in evolution to the first emergence of multicellular organisms. Antimicrobial properties, killing bugs like MRSA, and very potent antioxidant properties. So you combine all of these three and you really have a truly amazing class of compounds, almost unique. So they belong in every household, just like sugar or a bar of soap, etc. And so our vision is to enable that revolution. And to do that, there's one key that has to be solved. And that is the way to get these ingredients into every household. You have to get the mainstream consumer packaged good companies on board. Companies like Unilever, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, etc. And at the moment, they're all sitting out and watching. And so understanding what's the key to unlocking them, and unlocking them is essentially what we are focused on in order to realize our vision.
So basically, you're talking a consistent supply chain.
Well, there are a number of issues. So what's holding back today consumer packaged good companies are two main categories: supply chain issues, and we've all heard about supply chains more than we've ever thought we'd ever hear about of late, and then legal complexity. So on the supply chain, I think we've heard from other participants about consistency, scalability, purity. Purity and contamination is a big issue with the plant. People may not know this, but the cannabis plant actually extracts heavy metals out of the soil. It's used to remediate industrial sites. Well, not so great if you're going to make a product that people are going to consume. Also, price stability. If you're going to be ordering gazillion units a year, you want to know what price it's going to be at. And with this whole agricultural paradigm that exists today, you get supply variability, which then feeds into volatility. There's also the whole environmental footprint. I think it's becoming much better known that growing the cannabis plant is very intensive from an environmental point of view. In fact, the way that law enforcement traditionally found an illegal cannabis grow is there was a spike of electricity consumption. So you're solving all of these supply chain issues, but equally important are the legal complexity.
And actually some of that supply chain, that certainty of product feeds into the legal and regulatory, doesn't it? Because you have to be, for legal and regulatory purposes, absolutely sure what you're dealing with.
Right. And also, if you're going to take it to like pharmaceutical applications or putting it into foods, consistency is key. Not only do you need to know that you've got the product you want, say CBG or CBD in there in high potency, you've got to know what the impurities are too. And that those impurities don't change from batch to batch, because quite often it's those impurities that have the adverse reaction, not the actual ingredient itself. So on the legal complexity, let me just take a few moments to kind of recap on that. It's really important. So, Colgate launches a new product, Crest toothpaste. It doesn't launch products, it doesn't create products for local markets. It needs products it can sell all over the world. And so if you have an ingredient like cannabinoids today that come from the plant, where there's this whole patchwork of legal framework, then you can't be assured that you're going to be able to sell this product all over the world, they're not going to bother. So this all traces back to the 1971 UN Convention on Psychotropic Substances, where what they did is they said THC, bad stuff, it's a narcotic, doesn't matter how you make THC, it's a narcotic. The other thing that they did was, in their great wisdom in the 1970s, in order to limit access to THC, they said, well, the cannabis plant is a narcotic as well. And everything derived from the cannabis plant is a narcotic. Now, most countries around the world are signatories to that convention. And so most of the legal frameworks around the world reflect that. Now, the huge inadvertent consequences of that cannabis being scheduled bit was, well, you could have a perverse outcome that sugar made from cannabis, all plants make sugar. If you had sugar made from cannabis, that would be a narcotic. And so really what they did was the kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. There's all these cannabinoids out there, over 100 identified in nature. And really only one is particularly intoxicating, THC. All the other ones are not. But if they're derived from the cannabis plant, they're now considered a narcotic, irrespective of the fact that they don't get you high, they're not addictive, and they actually have some really amazing properties. And so this is where biosynthesis solves the issue as well, which is because there's no cannabis plant involved. Now, if you're making these cannabinoids, as long as you're not making THC, then they're not scheduled substances, and therefore you can sell them. They're treated just like any other ingredient all over the world.
So does that mean that biosynthesis is marking the end of the cannabis plant?
Not at all. And I'm at pains to point this out. Look, I think biosynthesis and the cannabis plant will coexist. Biosynthesis has some important roles to play in the market. I think some of previous presenters talked about these rarer cannabinoids that are hard to extract from the plant because they're in very small quantities. Well, biosynthesis allows you to make those commercially, economically at scale. So that's one point. Then we talked about all the consumer packaged good requirements, supply chain, legal simplicity, etc. So, but on the other hand, the cannabis plant, or in fact, is this amazing mixture of hundreds of different metabolites. And so the comparison here is with a vintage wine. You can't recreate that synthetically. And actually, we should not use the word synthetic. You can't recreate that. It's a unique product of nature. And so there will always be demand for the cannabis plant. People who want that special taste, flavor, experience. But in the same way as there's a wine market, there's a market for alcohol that goes into alcopops, industrial use, whatever. And that's where biosynthesis will play. When you want cannabinoids just as an ingredient to go into creams or soaps or beverages or whatever, and you don't actually want or need that whole unique experience, that's where biosynthesis really plays. And so I think the two coexist quite nicely.
Now, you're a serially successful entrepreneur, and I'm really interested, Roy, in why you've moved into this space, but also what's involved in commercializing the science here, because you've got these cannabinoids, and it's the journey between discovery and product that is the most hazardous and contains the most difficult terrain. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, look, I'm a scientist at heart. I studied biochemistry back in the UK and Cambridge years ago. But what I've been doing for the past 25 years is commercializing science. I love science, I love technology, but taking it out of the bench and into the real world, that's the only way it ever benefits people. And that's a very difficult and different journey. And so everyone loves to focus on the science, loves to focus on the clever bit, the microchip in the computer. But in my experience, taking these type of technologies, inventions into the real world, it's the small stuff that gets you. It's the downstream processing, the scaling up, the taking it out of the lab into real production. That's where most of these technologies just fail. And so, yes, you've got to have good science. And we at Creo, we've actually got the largest patent portfolio in this space, but that's not a sufficient component. You need to have everything else that goes around it, the knowledge, the experience, capital. I mean, everyone loves a story of a startup. Someone began in their garage, few $1 million grew to the next HP. The reality is, for these kind of things, you need tens of millions of dollars to really get it to market. You need multidisciplinary teams. This is not just biology. This is chemistry and chemical engineering and process engineering. You probably need a team of, access to 80 or 90 people with different expertise, manufacturing expertise, etc. And you need a different mindset. Science tends to progress in a direction. You do research, you do this, and then you move to pilot, etc. What I've always found is that if you follow that trajectory, you end up taking steps back all the time as you encounter things that you hadn't thought about previously. And so my philosophy has been, and I learned this the hard way, you start with the end in sight. You start with the commercial manufacturing embodiment, and you work backwards from that. And that hopefully saves you some pain and headaches as you go all the way through to commercialization. Now, I think the other part of your question was what interested me about this. Well, I became enamored with biosynthesis. I love to dig into science. That's where I get my inspiration. I truly believe, as an aside, that this is one of the key technologies that will help us as a society address climate change. It allows us to replace petrochemicals, but also, and people don't necessarily think about this a lot, intensive agriculture, cutting down rainforests, depleting the lands from minerals, etc. And that's where it kind of dovetails with the cannabis. Cannabis growing is intensive agriculture. So biosynthesis is the future. We are in this century of biology. Remember this, more and more of what we're going to be consuming will be made in this way. But on the other hand, cannabinoids are these amazing class of compounds. It's like you stumbled on this whole new species in the Amazon that man has never seen, has all these medical and other properties. And it's not because we haven't known about it, it's been there in plain sight, but because of this kind of weird legal history that it's been stigmatized and put off limits. And so what I realized was that biosynthesis and cannabinoids were the perfect match. And let me tell you why. The big challenge... Briefly. Yeah, sorry. It's about this trade-off that you have between size of market and value of product. So typically, the bigger markets are commodity products. The high-value ingredients are smaller markets. Cannabinoids is an outlier. These are very high-value ingredients, but have huge markets that are growing at 30+% per annum. And that's where there was this very good commercial and technical fit between the two.
One of the things that is fascinating about this, of course, is that the plant does its own biosynthesis to produce cannabinoids. It's not perfect every time. You get a huge variation between plants. But we shouldn't forget that actually biosynthesis is also a biological process. And prey, as we've seen with vaccines, to sometimes just failing for no particular reason that anybody can see. So it does take an enormous amount of effort to get everything right. And that means, I guess, that you really, really need, as you put the money into development and into the equipment and plant you really need the protection of IP. Tell me a bit about the IP in this sector.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Look, before we did any work in the laboratory, I spent 6 months with an IP lawyer understanding the IP landscape. So very much in my mind, in my previous venture, we had a portfolio of 900 patents. We actually ended up suing a competitor for infringement in the UK, and we won in that case. It was a 3.5-year process. But so what I wanted to make sure is, again, with this whole start with the end in sight, that whatever we were going to be developing was going to have freedom to operate, i.e., you're not infringing anyone else's patents by doing your process, because that can kill your business. And what we discovered was there was already a lot of IP from a biology point of view around the kind of things you'd have to do to make cannabinoids. This was back in 2016. So, and a lot of that IP was in the area of yeast as a host. There are two main hosts used in biosynthesis, yeast and bacteria. And so because of that, we went down a bacterial route. And we're almost unique in having done that. And that was really much driven by the IP insights of what's out there. And so we've been able to create total white space around our process. Because we're one of the first companies to do this, we actually have the largest patent portfolio in cannabinoid biosynthesis. Most of the other players have gone down that yeast route. And there's some reasons why that might have been the obvious thing to do. But not only was the landscape crowded back then, it's super crowded now. And all of these yeast players are going to be tripping over each other. And we're beginning to see that. Willow Biosciences are being sued by Aurora for IP infringement. Amaris is being sued by Levan, partly for IP misappropriation as well. So, you know, understanding this and making this part of your design process. And just before you think that, oh, the customer's not affected by any of this, that's not true. Because under an IP infringement judgment, you can confiscate material from customers, and indeed they may even be implicated if they're knowingly participating in taking product that infringes someone else's IP. So it's kind of the boring stuff that I was talking about, all these things in the background that actually the small stuff that can kill you rather than the sexy science, which I love and I can talk a lot about. But this is a really key point.
And it is a really important point to make, because as you point out, the market is, you know, with a market growing at 30% a year, of course, it's going to attract the world and his wife to it. And yes, the more crowded it gets, the more important those IP protections are. We said at Edison Open Forum that this is about the brightest minds in the area. Well, we count you as one of those, quite definitely, Roy. And what I wanted to tap your brain on was where you think the sector will be in 5 years' time.
So, you know, I take this back to the vision of Creo. We believe cannabinoids will be in every household. And it's not going to be some big deal. There won't be some big stigma around it. It'll actually be just another boring ingredient. But that is the measure of success. And to do that, it's big consumer packaged good companies that adopt that. For that to happen, biosynthesis has to become mainstream for cannabinoids. And as you look at similar marketplaces, for example, look at the flavor and fragrance industry. They sell high value ingredients to all the consumer packaged good companies. There are 4 companies that dominate that market, over 70% of the market, 4 companies. I think the same is going to happen here. You're going to have a small number of runaway leaders that emerge, and all the rest are going to struggle. And so for us at Creo, you know, the name of the game is to be one of those runaway leaders, and we think we have all the ingredients to be one of those.
So to conclude, Roy, just give me your pitch. If I have clutching my money in my hands, wanting to invest, why should I invest in Creo, and what have you got coming up that should excite me?
Yes, sure. So I'd say, look, cannabinoid biosynthesis is a huge market opportunity. Raymond James, analyst firm in Canada, have valued it on an NPV basis at $34 billion. There'll be a small number of runaway leaders, and Creo has all the ingredients, no pun intended, to be one of those leaders. You know, technically backed by one of the best names in the industry. I hadn't talked about that, but our partner is a company called Genomatica, who are one of the pioneers in this whole space. They own 30% of Creo. We're already in manufacturing, partnered with a major multinational ingredients company. We're producing our ingredients at an FDA-registered food-grade facility in the United States. So we've done all the scale up. We've got the largest patent portfolio in this space, and importantly, as I highlighted, the freedom to operate. We've assembled a world-class management team. Just to mention a few, Joel Cherry, our CTO, was CTO of Amyris, probably the best, most known company in this space. He's one of the most technically respected people out there. Graham Kenny, who ran the personal care business for Creo in the United States, a big ingredients supplier. And then finally, capital. We have raised and deployed $45 million to date. This takes a lot of money. And so, that is why Creo, I believe, is one of the leading players. And, in terms of what to look at for the future, I think from us, it's really about commercialization. It's about getting these ingredients now increasingly in the hands of mainstream companies and getting them adopted and destigmatized throughout the world.
So a very exciting future for Creo ingredients and a very exciting future for this sector. Roy Lipski, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.